Thank you very much. So we're here at the last session of the day, so we'll do our best to keep it interesting. And I think having a panel of such esteemed people as we have here with us should hopefully do just that. So what, the theme for this discussion is what are private equity firms looking for as they're investing in Southeast Asia? And so everybody's been introduced here, but we have a number of the top professionals across some of the largest private equity firms, and then also some that have transitioned into some smaller firms recently. And so with that, why don't we start with David? So David, you've had a long career at TPG, which is obviously a firm focused on the largest, biggest types of deals, but have recently, and I guess as of today, officially joined Jungle Ventures as a partner. And now we'll be looking at Series A, Series B size investments. So as you transition from the world of the really big to the really small, what sorts of things are you looking at, and how do you plan to approach this either the same or differently to the way you did at TPG?
So thanks for that. Private equity tends to be very thematic based. If you go buy an airline, you turn it around, you have a great team behind it, and you say, let's go buy another airline. And so as a result, you develop core competencies around certain verticals. And I actually don't think that's any different in venture capital. So venture capital at the lower end of the ecosystem also tends to be very thematic. And the partners that are investing in venture capital firms at that level also develop a high level of pattern recognition. And so if you focus on consumer internet, for example, if you focus on SaaS or different verticals, you see enough of those companies where you can start to tell, upon meetings, I like your business, or I like your business, but think you should be doing this, or actually you're not quite right for us. And so I think you can make those kind of quick decisions. I think obviously, the speed and the pace at which deals move for VC is commensurate with the check size. And so if you're at TBG and you're investing 20 to 50 million in capital, you're going to take a lot more methodical of a process and have a lot more rigor around the diligence and think through where the company is and where you can add value. Where obviously the smaller check size, you probably are moving a lot faster because the company is itself moving a lot faster, and so you need to keep pace with that. But my philosophy is no matter what the check size is, it's the same kind of investment thesis I think that you're working towards.
Very good, thank you. I think that's very insightful. That clearly, vertical focus and a lot of the key things that you do in large firms also works with smaller firms, smaller investments. Maybe transitioning next to Melissa. So Melissa, at General Atlantic, you've had many very successful investments certainly in the U.S., but also in the region, in China, being an early investor in Alibaba and Meituan and a number of other high-quality companies. And then also in Southeast Asia, you've found Garena, which is one of the few multi-billion-dollar companies in the market today. But to what extent do you and does your firm able to leverage your networks and what you've learned in somewhere like China, which has a lot of similarities to Southeast Asia, as you're looking at investments in Southeast Asia and as you're working with your portfolio companies in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, so GA is actually one of the oldest growth equity firms globally. We've been investing in technology for over 35 years. So the great thing being part of a global firm is that you get to see the trends and themes happening in the US, in China, in India, in Brazil. And so what's happened in China is that, taking the trends and themes that we've seen in the US, a great example is Meituan, which we've invested in China, is that we've taken the group buying model with Groupon in the US, and we basically say, hey, Meituan is a great adaptation of that model to a market where the offline retailers are just not as developed as the offline retailers in the US. And basically, Meituan is being used as a sales channel, an online sales channel to push customers offline to the offline retailers, right? And so basically we look for business models in each of the local markets which have localized these global trends and themes that we've identified in our thought center in the US. And same with Garena as well, right? It's an online game publisher, but really how it's really been successful in this region is that it's managed to localize and create real barriers to entry in each of the Southeast Asian markets that they're in terms of forming their own payments, offline payments network, in terms of offline marketing, right? So I think that that's really a great benefit that we bring to our portfolio companies, companies, we help them think strategically, thematically about where the next stage of growth is going to be, right? So now Garena, they have a great core PC business, but they're moving into mobile, right? Because that's where the growth is going to come from. And all of us know this is a mobile-first economy. So we're helping them think about their strategies in mobile messaging and, payments and C2C mobile commerce. So I think that's how we've managed to help in a big way for a lot of our companies and helping them localize.
That's great. Thank you very much. Maybe changing gears just a little bit, Aki. So everybody else here is in more kind of traditional private equity. You sort of split between traditional private equity and strategic, representing the venture arm of Recruit, a corporation, and you also fill a role at Recruit as head of research and development. So I wanted to see if you could share some thoughts as to how you view your role as in R&D influencing the kinds of investment decisions that you make at Recruit Strategic Partners.
Thank you, James. In terms of my investment decisions, the most important thing is whether we can make them grow or not. First of all, the mission of our R&D is to develop new business at a global scale. So RSP, the corporate venture capital fund of the group, is just one piece of what we do. And as for our R&D, there are four teams. There are four teams to R&D, led by four separate teams. One is the business development teams, and second is RSP, and the third is growth team, and lastly we have the artificial intelligence research centers. The role of business development team is to build new business from scratch with just internal resource. The RSP is, as you know, the 100% Recruit-owned fund that makes investment to disruptive startups outside of Recruit. I have already invested in 50 startups in the world, and half of them are Silicon Valley-based company. And thirdly, growth team will then provide our knowledge, our know-how, and manpower to those startups, both from business team and RSPs. When those startups come to the stage where they acquire lots of data, then that's where AI Research Center will provide additional growth, leveraging our AI technologies. So we are aiming to build new global business with these four functionally related teams. This is a major differentiation point of ours among other investors.
That's great. Thank you very much. Maybe moving back to traditional private equity, Terence. So you obviously come from a firm that, or still at a firm, unlike David, that is really known for the largest LBOs, the largest deals, the biggest checks. Hasn't historically been known for small private investments, small growth investments. How do you look at this market? How do you see a firm such as KKR being able to participate in earlier stage funds, earlier stage type investments that you see around Southeast Asia?
It's not a simple answer. It's something that as a firm we've spent a lot of time on, and we continue to spend a lot of time on. And I imagine lots of other traditional larger firms, firms that focus on larger investments are having the same kinds of discussions that we're having. But I think in short, we can't ignore the trend, right? We are seeing so many promising young companies, entrepreneurs, and businesses that could be very successful in the future. And as a trend, it's something we can't pretend is not happening. So it's something that we are spending a lot of time trying to figure out. We haven't yet figured it out. We're still trying to do that. We're still going through it. And we've made a number of investments in the sector as we try to navigate our way. But what I'd say in Southeast Asia and in Asia more broadly, what has changed and what is different about this time around versus the last, prior times is the sizes of the opportunities are now a lot larger. Right? It's still a very young market, still very fragmented, but the opportunities and the opportunity sets out there are a lot larger than things that we've looked at in the past. So things that previously would have been below our radar screen, two small investments or two small companies, are now very much within our sweet spot. And the traditional VC investors who usually invest smaller check sizes may find these actually on the large size of things. So that is one of the major things that has changed in the market, and contributes to the many reasons why we should not be ignoring the space. But I think for a firm like us, there's a lot of evolution that needs to be done for us to really do these types of companies and opportunities justice. First we need to be clear with ourselves. This is not a style drift. We're not going from one type of investment to completely doing a different type of investment. So we will not go very small. We will not go very extremely early stage VC type investments. The investments that we have made in the space have tended to be later rounds, Series C, Series D, and later. And this capability is already somewhat developed in the US and Europe for us, and we're still developing it in Asia, and I think it's a matter of time until this is a more substantial part of the business. We also try to take a portfolio approach. So we're not we will not characterize ourselves as technology investors. Technology is one of the sectors that we that we invest in, and our funds are generally available for investments in all types of industries. So we would take a portfolio approach to say, well, what should the weighting of the portfolio be in technology, and then you want to avoid too much concentration. Right, so again, even for large fund sizes, you want to be careful about how you spread your bets and in the sector. I think as far as evaluating these opportunities, I think we have to update and evolve our methods as well. I think to David's point, at the end of the day, you need to get to the right answer, and that's true for traditional businesses as well as for younger or faster growing businesses. But the way you do that may be different, right? Or will need to be different, right? The speed at which you do that and the methods will require more creativity and being more entrepreneurial, just like the companies that we're evaluating. And that's something, having our style of investing and evaluating companies built up over so many years, this is something that we spend a lot of time trying to figure out. Young companies will not have the same track record, will not have the same availability of data, and so on. And the market is just evolving faster than some of the more traditional businesses that we've looked at. So this is a big area where we need to update the way that we think and we do things in order to be successful in the space. And I think lastly, we like to think of ourselves as value-added investors. So we don't just bring money. We like to say that we have capabilities to be able to help our investee companies, make them better, make them grow faster, and so on. We need to update these methods as well, right? I think we'll be the first to admit that we don't have a lot of capabilities as far as value add to help on the technology side of things, right? That's something that the startups and the entrepreneurs do very well. But where we can help, is perhaps on the more traditional side of things, and that should not be overlooked. Right? And that can be from anywhere from setting strategy to looking at the organization, sustainability of the organization, the management team, incentives, And then when you look at business issues, yes, it's a technology company, yes, it's high growth and disruptive and so on, but in many cases you're still dealing with many traditional issues. For example, in e-commerce, you're still dealing with logistics. Logistics is an old world issue. Maybe you have new solutions for it, but these are areas where we can help. It's just that we need to update our thinking and update the way that we do things from more traditional type businesses to make them applicable to the the startups and faster growth businesses. So it's not an easy answer to the question. It's something that we are working very hard on, and we will continue to. But I imagine that this issue is facing lots of companies, and it's going to be a work in progress.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I think as you point out, and we've seen a lot of traditional public market investors, companies like Fidelity, companies like Ontario Teachers, also spending a lot of time in this space. So it's evolving for not just you, but for many. So next, Aftab. So you obviously from Temasek are in the heart of Southeast Asia, and your company's sort of founded in this region. But I understand that you also spend a fair amount of time in Silicon Valley, in Tel Aviv, and other tech hubs around the world. And I think what would be interesting for us is to understand, from your personal perspective or from Temasek's perspective, how. So I guess what key themes and trends are you seeing really on the cutting edge in some of these other areas, which could be applicable in Southeast Asia?
Sure. Thanks, James. So we formed the Enterprise Development Group about 2 years ago, essentially for us to identify key trends of the future and how we as Temasek should respond to them. And so what we've done is we've set ourselves up across 3 different platforms, where one, we build new businesses from scratch. We incubate them within Temasek and build them up. The second one is we look to work to transform our existing businesses. So whether it's Singapore Airlines or CapitaLand or DBS, we work hands-on with them to see how they should respond to the key trends that are emerging in the ecosystem. And the third is the innovation pillar, where we partner with key VC funds globally, whether it's in the Valley, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in India, whether it's venture debt or venture capital. We work with all the various different players in the ecosystem. We invest in them to see what's happening in their portfolio and to learn where and how we in Temasek and our portfolio companies and our investment teams should be tracking the space and how we should be responding to the challenges to the existing business models. So we've actually been looking at opportunities globally. A lot of our time has been focused on in the Valley and in Israel, given our portfolio companies and their sort of key focus areas. Whether it's DBS looking at new business models in P2P lending, whether it's Certus Cisco, which is one of our security companies, looking at cybersecurity and the key trends that are happening there. What we're seeing now is that a lot of these Valley companies are looking to move to Southeast Asia earlier. I think after the whole, everyone's looked at the whole Uber story and how Grab Taxi, which is one of our portfolio companies, so replicated the model very quickly. We're seeing that a number of the Valley companies are looking to move to Southeast Asia at the Series B stage as well. And so we are actively investing at the Series B stage. In some cases, we're doing Series A, which is a big departure from what Temasek used to do, because we're seeing these companies that are scaling very quickly. Within 6 months, they're going from 100 million pre-money to 1 billion pre-money. And if we don't catch them at that stage, they very quickly sort of scale up and become significant challenges to our businesses. And so we've been investing in a number of technologies in the Valley in Israel and bringing them to Singapore, partnering with our corporates, whether it's in the urban solution space, whether it's in the fintech side, whether it's in the, we're looking at IoT, we're looking at wearables, we're looking at the whole smart nation space, because our portfolio spans across various different sectors. And we're trying to ensure that we're working with the right VC funds and the right universities. We've invested in a number of university IP commercialization programs as well to make sure that we're not caught off guard when the next Series C or Series D round happens.
Mobile has completely changed the game, and the ability to solve real-world problems through a smartphone, which everyone is going to carry with them everywhere they go, You know, I thought Mark Britt's iFlex presentation this morning was exactly right. I think it hit on a lot of really interesting points. But I think the most exciting thing is some of the innovation that we're seeing, particularly around the mobile and the app development space, which is very localized in some senses to this part of the world, but then also some of the innovation that's coming out of, you know, Singapore or Malaysia or Bangkok, which can actually be a global business. And I think as you think about Garena and some of these businesses able to scale, I think that's going to be one of the things that's really exciting over the next couple of years.
No, that's. I think the mobile trend is something we've heard people talking about all day long, and there's really a lot to go there. And it'd be interesting to see. You know, you hear lots of different theories even today about whether it's going to be an app ecosystem that's going to eventually thrive, or in fact, even API-driven businesses as opposed to app-driven businesses that are embedded into other larger apps. So I definitely think that's something to watch. So Melissa, a question for you. So as you know, GA has tended historically to span you know, big investments and small. Curious, as you're going through the process with the smaller companies, you know, many times the traditional financial analysis that you do when looking at a big company doesn't necessarily apply. And was just wanted to see if you give us a little bit of the inside workings of your firm, and how does you know, how do your committees get comfortable when you're dealing with these really small companies and you can't tick all the boxes that you normally tick in your investment memo because the data is just not there, the company is just too early. It'd be interesting to hear how that you know, how some of those stories go down.
Yeah, there are many stories. So I think one thing to clarify is that although we originally were a venture capital firm, today we're a growth equity, which means that we play in the space between venture capital and buyout firms like KKR. Right? So when we look at companies, we don't look at companies in general which do not have unit economics, right? So obviously, like the venture firms, we look at big growing markets, market leader in those markets, you know, benign competitive environment, great entrepreneur. But we also look, other than the traffic metrics, we do spend a lot of time trying to understand the unit economics, the variable profit margin, pre-marketing, post-marketing, seeing how that will evolve over time, how that compares to our other portfolio companies across the world. So we actually put in quite a lot of analysis. I think even in some of our smaller investments, such as Yemek Sepeti in Turkey, for example, it's a very small online food marketplace business, food delivery site. But when we invested, we put in a $40 million check size, but it was already profitable. Right? So it's a small company, it was already profitable, had great metrics. So we don't sacrifice certain fundamentals just because it's an earlier stage company. It can be a great company even though it's small, right? So I think that's how we think about it.
Definitely, lots of small companies can still be great companies. But no, I think that's pretty clear. I know lots of big firms tend to get bogged down in their committee processes, and so it's good to be able to adapt those to different situations. So I guess Terrence, a question for you. So how much time do you spend working with some of your existing portfolio companies, looking to help them make investments in smaller stage companies? Because I think, you know, many times, as a big investor that has portfolio companies, you can give your LPs direct exposure, but also you can get exposure through juicing the returns on some of your existing investments.
Yeah, it's definitely an area where we do spend a fair bit of time, but I would say slightly broader than just having our portfolio companies look for investments in the space, but also, you know, developing in-house, and how can they transition from being, for example, purely offline to, you know, having an online component that will add value to the company. I think, I mean, it's very investment specific. It depends on the type of business, the rate of change in the industry, and also, you know, the online threat and so on. For example, in China, investments that, you know, a few years ago were predicated on retail growth and so on in the traditional sense, have been absolutely destroyed by e-commerce. So those are the very pressing ones where I mean, you have no choice really, but to find a way to compete online and to quickly transition the business model, and whether that means you acquire or make an investment in something, or whether you grow it in-house and just transition the business model from offline to online, you have to find some way to do it, and that's an area where we do increasingly spend a lot of time. I mean, in our core private equity business, we have assistance from KKR Capstone, which is an operational focused group, who help us with our portfolio companies and to value add. And technology is an area where we now have a big focus. So we have dedicated folks based here, but also every other part of the world where Capstone is active, in North America and Europe as well, focusing on actually developing technology and advising companies on how to actually achieve that.
Very good. All right, and I think we have time for probably one last question. So for Aftab, so one debate that I've heard recently, I don't know if I've heard it discussed today, but as you look at a region like Southeast Asia, you've seen some companies take a strategy of basing in Singapore and then trying to roll out to the region. You've seen other countries that have taken the approach of developing sort of in-market, and it's obviously still early days for a lot of these types of things, and e-commerce in particular, but other areas in internet. Curious if you have a house view or a personal view around ultimately which is likely to be more successful.
Sure. So I think the way we're looking at it is, we're obviously looking to address some of the really large problems that we see globally, and how we can use potentially Singapore as a test bed towards larger rollout across Asia. So as an example, we're talking about driverless cars. We're trying to see how and where Singapore could potentially be a pilot for driverless cars, and looking at sort of alleviating urban solutions. Another area we're looking at is food technology. There are a lot of companies in the valley that are making beef and egg from plant protein. What are the health risks associated with that? And are we able to do it at cheaper costs? And then can we roll them out using Singapore as a test bed for them, and then rolling them out the region? We're looking at things in cybersecurity, where companies in Israel typically haven't looked at Asia. They've typically focused on the West. And as they look at Asia and they look to establish in Asia and they're looking at regions, Singapore tends to be a safer place, perceived safer place for them to base themselves, rather than going to China directly. So I think we see all these sort of opportunities Singapore-centric, where Singapore can be the pilot and the test bed. We have a big Smart Nation program initiative as well. So we see a lot of these technologies fitting into that, and hopefully sort of through that, rolling them out across Southeast Asia and then across Asia as a whole. So that's been our focus, is looking at some of the really tough solutions that are being worked out, whether in Israel or in the Valley. And so we, as a group, haven't focused on e-commerce and other areas that typically is covered by our VC arm, which is Vertex. We've typically focused on some of the really hard problems that folks are trying to solve, and then putting a significant amount of capital and provide pilots and test beds through our operating companies, whether it's DBS or Capital Land or Singapore Airlines and others, to try and build market acceptance.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. That was nearly perfectly timed at the end of our countdown. So look, thanks everybody for your attention for the past 35 minutes. I believe most of us will be at the dinner this evening, so certainly feel free to grab folks if you have additional questions that we weren't able to address in this panel forum. But thank you very much, everybody, for your time and for your thoughts.